In a packed lecture hall in Western Europe, a single sentence triggered an international academic reckoning. It began with laughter, quiet first, then confident. A European linguistics professor dismissed a Filipino graduate student's grammar as structurally unsophisticated. The remark seemed minor, almost casual. But what followed exposed how power, language, and prestige collide in global academia, and how an entire linguistic tradition was forced into the spotlight by those who refused to stay silent. The student's name was Mateo Reyes, a doctoral candidate presenting research on bilingual syntax in Southeast Asia. His slides were meticulous. His data spanned decades. Yet, midway through his presentation, the interruption came. Professor Heinrich Volker, a celebrated authority in European linguistics, leaned back and smiled. He praised the effort, then questioned whether Filipino grammar possessed a refinement expected at advanced academic levels. The room reacted instantly with nods, whispers, and restrained amusement. To many attendees, the comment sounded academic, even polite. But to linguists familiar with Austronesian languages, it carried a sharper meaning. Filipino grammar, rooted in Tagalog and shaped by centuries of history, is among the most structurally complex systems studied today. Its voice-focused syntax defies Western subject-object hierarchies. Mateo paused, choosing his words carefully. He thanked the professor and continued, but the moment had already shifted from scholarly debate to quiet humiliation. Volker's reputation loomed large. He chaired multiple European language committees and advised global education bodies. His textbooks defined advanced grammar through European paradigms. To challenge him publicly was career suicide. Mateo knew this. He finished his presentation with composure, yet the damage lingered. Afterward, conversations in the hall centered not on data, but on perceived inadequacy. Filipino grammar was once again framed as derivative, colonial, and simplified. What few realized was that the presentation had been recorded, not officially but casually, by another attendee, Dr. Annika Sorensen, a Scandinavian computational linguist specializing in non-European syntax. She replayed the moment later, unsettled. Volker had not critiqued methodology. He had dismissed an entire grammatical system. Annika recognized a pattern. It was not new. Academic authority had long defined linguistic sophistication through Eurocentric standards. Within days, excerpts from the lecture circulated privately among linguistics forums. No names were attached, but the implication was clear. Filipino grammar was being judged by the wrong framework. A group of linguists from Japan, Kenya, Chile, and Indonesia began discussing the incident. Many had faced similar dismissals. Their languages labeled irregular, overly contextual, or inefficient. What united them was not nationalism, but shared frustration with academic gatekeeping. They decided to act methodically, not emotionally. A consortium formed, informal at first, composed of syntacticians, historical linguists, and language model researchers. Their goal was narrow yet ambitious. Demonstrate using peer-reviewed analysis that Filipino grammar possessed complexity equal to, and in some areas exceeding, European languages. They focus on verb-focused systems, information structure, and morphosyntactic flexibility. Areas where Tagalog-based grammar is uniquely sophisticated. At the center of the data was something Volker had overlooked: alignment. Filipino grammar does not privilege subjects the way English or German does. Instead, it prioritizes discourse relevance. This allows speakers to foreground actors, objects, locations, or beneficiaries without restructuring entire sentences. To Western-trained linguists, this appeared vague, but mathematically, it required greater cognitive processing. Machine translation systems had struggled with it for decades. The consortium prepared a joint paper, but they aimed beyond journals. They submitted a proposal to the International Linguistics Symposium in Geneva, a conference series Volker frequently headlined. The panel title was neutral: Reevaluating Grammatical Complexity Beyond European Models. Volker was listed as a respondent. It was a calculated risk. The academic world watched closely when the program was released. When the symposium convened, the room was filled beyond capacity. Mateo sat quietly in the back, invited but not listed as a speaker. The presenters walked through comparative syntax trees, computational simulations, and acquisition studies. Slide after slide demonstrated that Filipino grammar required greater contextual integration than German or French. The room grew tense, not hostile, but alert. This was not advocacy. It was evidence. Then came the moment everyone anticipated. Volker took the microphone. His response was measured, almost offensive. He acknowledged the data, but argued that pedagogical elegance still favored European models. That was when Dr. Sorensen spoke. Calmly, she pointed out that elegance was not a scientific metric. Efficiency was. And by that standard, Filipino grammar allowed more semantic precision with fewer structural changes. The exchange marked a turning point. Other linguists followed. A Kenyan scholar discussed Bantu parallels. A Japanese researcher compared topic prominent structures. Slowly, Volker's framework appeared increasingly narrow. No one attacked him personally. They dismantled the assumption beneath his authority. By the session's end, applause filled the hall, not for victory, but for recalibration. The fallout was immediate. Academic blogs dissected the panel. Students shared clips. Linguistics departments issued statements reaffirming non-European language research. Volker's original comment resurfaced, now contextualized as outdated. He released a response acknowledging implicit bias shaped by training. It was not an apology, but it was a concession. Mateo's role emerged gradually. Journalists traced the story back to his presentation. Interviews followed. He spoke carefully, emphasizing that Filipino grammar did not need defending. It needed understanding. He described growing up switching between English and Tagalog, navigating systems that told him one language was global and the other local. Academia, he realized, mirrored that imbalance. Universities took notice. Several institutions revised linguistics curricula, expanding non-European frameworks. Funding bodies announced grants for underrepresented language systems. Filipino linguistics, long treated as regional, gained new visibility. What began as laughter in a lecture hall had triggered structural review at the highest levels of language scholarship. For many Filipino scholars, the moment resonated deeply. It was not about validation from Europe. It was about reclaiming intellectual agency. Grammar reflects worldview. For centuries, colonial history framed Filipino language as broken Spanish or simplified English. The symposium challenged that narrative through rigor, not rhetoric. Volker quietly withdrew from one advisory role months later. His textbooks were updated in later editions. Footnotes changed. Examples expanded. It was not a downfall, but a recalibration of influence. In academic terms, that shift was significant. Authority rarely yields unless compelled by overwhelming evidence. Meanwhile, Mateo completed his doctorate. His dissertation, once labeled niche, became widely cited. He declined offers framed as symbolic representation, choosing instead a research post focused on multilingual cognition. This was not about one Filipino scholar succeeding. It was about shifting the center of linguistic gravity. The story spread beyond academia. Media framed it as a clash between old authority and emerging global scholarship. But insiders knew the truth was quieter. No shouting, no scandal, just a system confronting its blind spots. That made it more unsettling and more powerful. Language is never neutral. It encodes power, hierarchy, and history. When one grammar is labeled advanced, another becomes deficient by default. The intervention by linguists worldwide exposed how those labels were constructed and who benefited from them. In classrooms across Asia, professors reference the symposium as a case study, not of controversy, but of methodology. Students learned that complexity is not resemblance to Latin roots. It is internal logic. Filipino grammar always had that. It simply lacked authority within global institutions. The laughter that once echoed in that lecture hall faded into academic footnotes, but its consequences endured. For Filipino linguistics, it marked a transition from marginalization to central inquiry, from being explained to being examined on its own terms. What made the moment historic was not the humiliation, but the response. No outrage campaigns. No slogans, just scholars testing assumptions against reality. That discipline was what the institution claimed to value all along. Years later, the symposium is still cited, not for drama, but for recalibration. It reminded the field that global languages do not need permission to be complex. They need frameworks willing to listen. For viewers watching the story unfold, the lesson extends beyond linguistics. Expertise without self-examination becomes authority without accountability. When that authority is challenged by evidence, the result is not collapse. It is evolution. Filipino grammar did not change that day. The world's perception of it did. In academic systems, perception often determines what is funded, taught, and preserved. In the end, no one won, but many learned. And in institutions built on hierarchy, that outcome is rare. What began as dismissal became documentation. What began as laughter became literature. What was underestimated entered the global conversation on its own terms. This documentary-style narrative is a work of fiction inspired by real global debates in linguistics and academia. While characters and events are fictionalized, the structural tensions they reflect are real and still unfolding.